Good afternoon and welcome everybody to this wonderful, wonderful webinar, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Sharlene Cassel, National Director of Epilepsy South Africa, and truly excited about all of you joining us and us hosting this very important topic, being the month for our youth in South Africa. With me this afternoon, I've got Dr. Stevenson. She is a medical advisor at Sanofi, so we're really happy to have you and thank you for this afternoon. Wonderful, wonderful. I've got Professor Joe Wilmshurst, flown all the way in from Cape Town. Joe is head of Pediatric Neurology at Red Cross. And our third panelist this afternoon is Erasmus Claassen, and Eric is one of our bursary students from our Epilepsy South Africa Educational Trust. Eric has driven all the way from Potchefstroom, and we are very excited to have you join us this afternoon as well, Eric. So very, very welcome. So thank you once again for all of you being a part of us. And let me ask you, Eric, tell me, just as a youth in South Africa and a young man, how is it and how has epilepsy, being a person with epilepsy, how has it affected your life? And just tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, yeah, my epilepsy started when I was early stages of high school, when I was about 14 years old. And very tough time for something so dramatic to happen. So actually a lot of things I can't even remember because the affected area where the epilepsy was in my short-term memory. So a lot of stories I only heard afterwards. But yeah, there's a lot of factors that definitely did not benefit me, especially in that time where, you're still unsure about who you are and your identity, and you're starting to becoming a man now and away from a boy, and things like friends, that was quite tough. People rejecting you, not forming part of a group. In that time in your life, especially, you want to form part of a certain group. And actually I had the privilege of getting medical care for my epilepsy. So I actually had a few brain operations, which benefited me a lot in 2017. And epilepsy, therefore, is not part of my life anymore. Still, I have medication that I have to drink, which is still a bit tough sometimes because it makes you feel, especially the medication I'm on is quite strong sometimes for me. Making me feel gloomy or a bit foggy as the best I can describe it. So that is still quite tough to manage sometimes. But yeah, especially in the times where we were, when I was in high school, grade 8, grade 9, quite tough. Like I said, rejection, I think, was the main thing that was quite hard for me to manage. And luckily, I have a very supportive family. So 2 sisters and a father and a mother. All of them very supporting towards and understanding that I have certain medical problems or epilepsy, which affected my emotions as well. So sometimes I wasn't the most pleasant person to be around. But luckily they are very supportive, and they knew that there's nothing really, it's not my fault, it's just the cause of the epilepsy.
And so, just for you to add to us, were you having small seizures? Were you having large seizures? Were you having multiple seizures before? Just talk to us and just unpack that briefly for us.
Okay, yeah. So I had small seizures, which basically felt like if you're looking at off a high building and you see that it's quite high, that feeling in your chest. Then I just had to hold on to something like this or just go on the ground, which were the most common one for me. Sometimes at night I had like 10 to 15 of those, which was quite difficult to manage. And then I had a few grand mal episodes. Actually, I can't remember any of them. When I just woke up, I felt my tongue was bitten and my head was very sore. So then I knew I probably had a grand mal episode. So that I can't remember anything because of the short-term memory. So basically 3 hours or then when I went into the seizure and when I woke up after some rest after the seizure, I were present, but during the seizure I can't recall anything, but I know the small ones were just like I felt a bit weird in my chest, but something else that was basically.
Sure. Thank you, Eric. I mean, your teenage years have really, really been tough. It sounds just it's amazing that you're sitting with us and you're sitting in your life where you are now. So thank you. I think Nondumiso would like to jump in and ask a couple of medical questions. She's a medical doctor, and with this wonderful Professor Wilmshurst, who we're going to refer to as Joe, sitting next to her.
So I think, Prof, what I would like you to talk about now is what is epilepsy? How is it classified? And especially in South Africa, how many people are affected by it?
Thank you. Nondumiso, thank you very much for that opportunity. And it's such a privilege to be here today. So epilepsy is very common, or as we call them now, the epilepsies. The other thing to be aware of is that, in fact, any of us can have a seizure. It's just aberrant electrical activity. But to have the condition or the disease epilepsy, it's the tendency to have a recurrent event. That does not necessarily mean that you must be on medication. That would be needed if it impacts on your safety or your quality of life. And we've come a long way since before BC, when the first seizures were ever described. The International League Against Epilepsy has made a strong effort to try and control how we categorize the epilepsies to help us understand what they are, and from that, how we should be treating them better. And that we know that there are generalized seizures and focal seizures. But if we look in the world and how we're affected, 50 million people are believed to have epilepsy. And of that number, 80% of them are based in low and middle income countries. So that is us. Do we know how many people in South Africa have epilepsies? We don't know the exact figure. We estimate it's about 6 per 1,000. Undoubtedly, we think it's probably more because the burden of disease here is so much higher. When they looked at the actual burden of having epilepsy, it scored 5th of the series of neurological conditions worldwide. But when we actually broke that down in the sub-Saharan setting, we're number 2. Epilepsy scores as number 2 as the burden of disease for neurological diseases in the sub-Saharan setting region. So there are huge challenges that we face. And one of the other areas that the International League Against Epilepsy has done in forming a roadmap to help us understand the epilepsies and how we categorize them is to think about the causes. So the causes can be structural, where there's a change in your brain. It can be metabolic, for how your body clears things. It can be genetic, part of the way your genetic makeup is. They have this category of immune, and then infectious is incredibly important for our setting because we have so many infectious conditions that then lead to epilepsy as a sequelae. And we have a wonderful box of unknown because we don't know. It's important to say that you don't know. And the other area that they focused on is saying that when you have epilepsy, it never comes alone. That there are the challenges, which in fact Eric has so beautifully alluded to, of how hard it can be. The fact that it is a brain condition a brain disease that actually affects how you live and you function, how you sleep, how anxious you are, how you're able to focus at school, and many of the other implications in your life that actually affect how you move forward. And that it's not just about a seizure or the seizure event, it's everything else that comes with it. I could talk forever.
So Eric was diagnosed in adolescence or early teenage years, and we know that's often the time when people do get diagnosed, or even younger. Talk us through, from a medical perspective, what are the different manifestations of the natural history? He's now at university. What have you seen in your practice in terms of epilepsy and how people transition from adolescence to young adulthood?
Absolutely. So just to put it down to basics, so as a child neurologist, the majority of patients that I see are very little. So in fact, it's a delight to have somebody at Eric's age where I can relate and have a full conversation with him. But all the children that come to see me are very special to me. And as a child neurologist, I watch these children grow up. And it's quite hard going through the stages where the initial communications are only directed at the parents or the caregivers, and consciously, as they start reaching adolescence and becoming older, directing the questions and the conversations more to the child, who I want to have the empowerment and the decision-making and the voice to say, actually, how are they feeling? What are they happy with? What things are worrying them? And to start thinking and planning for the future and where they're going. And I love chatting to the kids about what are you enjoying in school, what's working well for you. And I don't think you can ever start too early with saying, where do you see yourself in the future? And what are your plans? And how can we help you with where you might want to go and what's happening? So it's very hard, especially in the South African public sector, that transition of care, because we don't have much capacity for, as they call it, the adolescent services. The children are with us, and then we have to hand them over to the adult services. And it's actually quite traumatic for us as well, letting go and a different setup. And we try to make sure that as many pieces are put in place as possible, but also that we plan and think about everything that's not just about how well controlled are the epilepsies, have we got the medication right, but also the life choices of what do you want and what do you want to get out of your management and what are your expectations?
You know, Nondumiso and Joe and Eric, it's just so fascinating for me how much what you're saying, and as two medical doctors and practitioners and such serious advocates, and what you're alluding to, the lifestyle and the medical support is, I have read so much about Eric's story, and as a person with epilepsy, just identify with his story. And, you know, Eric, I'd like you to just reflect, you know, around the conversations. And you went through your teenage years. Explain to us, in terms of your academic experience, in terms of your learning ability, in terms of the trauma that your family has been through, and how your mom and sisters and dad have taken you through that academic journey. So I'm just going to give it to you. Spend a while unpacking that for us. We want to know, through all the levels of medication, the depth, the amounts, just jump in and share that with us, please, because your story is just amazing.
So in grade 8, it's quite important to start your high school academics on a strong pace, so that you know you have to complete high school, and then after high school hopefully go, if you want, further education, university or so on. So I think every step is quite important. It was also always a thought of mine to be go to university and become a professional in whatever. I'm studying accountancy at the moment, so that was the profession I chose at the end. But I remember in grade 8, there's a lot of things I can't actually remember, but in grade 8, academics was still very important for me, because I knew I had to perform well if I want to go to university one day, or further education will be marked off your grade 8 and so on. And my sisters were in, I think one was grade 1 and the other one was grade 7 at the moment. So
It's
also
big age difference, yeah.
traumatic, very traumatic for them. A quite sad part is a lot of things I can't even remember, but they can still remember, like because of my memory loss during that stages of my life. And I think that impacted them as well and their academics as well. But especially for me, the medication a lot of times given to me were very strong. So I couldn't drink it before exams. So I had to set alarms for after exams because otherwise I would be too, fogged I couldn't think clearly, and it was quite hard to concentrate on that level that you should in exams. So I had to set alarms for after the test to drink medication. That was still the time when it was undiagnosed, because there was a period for about 1.5 years where we couldn't diagnose, all right, this is epilepsy. So we also, pulled a few straws and said, maybe it's this, and then test that theory and to see if that was working. So the medication for that as well was quite harsh for me. I remember I was told actually afterwards, grade 9 exam, I actually didn't write the end of the year exams because of my condition at that stage. It was quite difficult for me to from grade 8 to grade 9, that what can you call it? That transition was quite hard because of all the seizures and never going into deep sleep and getting a lot of seizures. That was quite dramatic on my academics. I think my marks actually went down about 23% from grade 8 to grade 9. For a brief period of time, we thought that university wouldn't actually be an option for me because of the burden of epilepsy. So actually at the moment, I'm so blessed that I have the opportunity to study, to know that where I've been in grade 9, struggling with academics and struggling to focus, and at the moment where I am at the 3rd year level of management accountancy at NWU, I think is quite a story of hope. And I hope that students that are on the same stage as me, as I was in grade 8, hear this story and know that there is hope for them, to know that there is success stories of people where they were and where they are now. I remember as well that I had the option of extra time at school, where they said, all right, we recognize that you have epilepsy and you have medication, so we will give you concession time to get extra time on exams. But I was quite stubborn at the moment. Like I said, no, I don't want that extra time.
Really?
Because I want to go to university, and at university level, there's not special treatment for people with epilepsy or so on. I remember, I think if I could go back now in time, I would be more, know that epilepsy is a problem and that it's okay if I need a bit of help, like extra time. But I remember at that time, it was just, I don't want to have the special treatment going along with, or being a sick person, or being an epileptic person, or I wanted to be just a normal kid. So I think in academics as well, it was important for me to know that I don't want to be
treated differently.
Treated in a special way, or be the teacher's pet or whatever because of my epileptic seizures. So it was quite, the academics I think was one of the greatly affected areas of epilepsy. And it was quite hard to manage, but
Sure.
through grace, I am where I am today.
I know you shared with me how tenacious your mom had been, and how she was so your advocate around your epilepsy wherever you went, and I think that level of support from your family really impacted and taught you that resilience and that tenacity of wanting that success. And that is so important, isn't it, Eric, to give people your age and teenagers just that understanding of, you have that support system. If it's not your family and it's not your inner circle, you have a support system around conversations like this that is so active to say, we are all saying, give epilepsy a voice. So yeah, I just, it's anything you'd like to add academically? I mean, from your school career, from you mentioned your memory. I mean, how did that affect your exam? Just in a quick summary, or your exam, your concentration, your focus through your exams when it was stressful.
Yeah, well, like I said, I can't actually, there's very few things I can remember during those times. So I don't actually know how I prepared for exams or actually knew what I was writing down or what I was studying at the moment. But yeah, it definitely greatly affected but I think if there's one thing I want to say that is quite important for me is that there is hope for people with, thinking now, oh, I have epilepsy, I will never be able to go to university or get any further education than high school, or drop out or so on, that there is stories of people like myself, and that's only by grace, but, to know where I was in grade 8, remembering nothing from there, not even being, there all the time, and today where I am today. So,
well, just sitting with you is and having you join us is just such a privilege, because I know from our educational trust perspective and our trustees just going, it's just, we're watching you in absolute awe, I just want to also, everybody on social media that's engaging, that's sending comments, the comments are streaming in. And I just want to acknowledge every single one of you, because we're going to do our best to answer as many of your questions and your answers during our discussions. And if we can't here, we'll live stream post this broadcast in terms of more information for you. Remember, we're advocating, we're advocacy, we're giving you education and knowledge. And I think, I just want to give our doctors more time, our professor more time. So I'd like to just, Nondumiso, is there anything you'd like to ask Joe or Eric? Yes. I mean, we're in the middle of the conversations.
Sure. So Eric has alluded to the team or the teachers, the parents, and the support that he got from them. And I know you also definitely one of the doctors that considers yourself a member of the family. So my question is about the medical or the treating doctor, as well as the multidisciplinary team that is engaged in the care and the treatment of a child with epilepsy. What is their role? How can they be supportive from a young age all the way through to university? How can that support look?
Absolutely. Thank you. So it is a journey. It's a wonderful journey. It's an interesting journey. And it starts as well with trying to get it right from the beginning and listening. So one of the mistakes that often happens is that you misinterpret or erroneous diagnoses are made. And if somebody gets the diagnosis wrong at the beginning, it can be a disaster. So in fact, one of the most humbling experiences is saying, I'm not sure. So I love that Eric said, well, they knew that it was epilepsy, but they didn't know at the beginning what it was. That's actually fantastic, because what you don't want is for somebody boxing you and then limiting what else can happen. If it's a question, it should stay a question, because often things unravel and become clearer with time. But once you're clear on that path and you know what the issues are, then you need to make sure that all the right stakeholders are included. And there's this concept of a comprehensive care plan. And that really starts with the person with epilepsy is in the middle of it. And ideally their family, their immediate family are the surrounding bubble around them, because they also need support and they also need communication and they all need to be part of the conversations. But then there are any other stakeholders who are important. And we were discussing before the meeting about resources. And if you're in a resource equipped setting, you'd have all these resources to draw on. In our setting, that's not always possible, but actually there are amazing people that can help. And having a strong engagement with particular school teachers, particular schools, and actually getting them to be open to being upskilled and engaged and part of the support service, even having a buddy team of friendship circles for the child, and actually exactly that feeling of not feeling different, but feeling included, feeling part of it. And also it's important to embrace issues. There are many different conditions that people can have and diseases. And in fact, why should one be isolated? It's simply the miasma of how we all are, and being as inclusive as possible and not limiting our choices of where we go. So I think those are part of the critical aspects in keeping the conversation going. And a lot of the work that we do within the clinic isn't just the back and forth communication with the child and the family, but it's also writing letters to the schools, to any other sort of community linked sections, and to try and make sure that the optimal resources are actually provided. Sometimes just making sure that the medication is available as well when it's interrupted.
I'm going to offer up a little bit from what you're saying, starting off with when you mentioned multiple stakeholders and the coordination thereof. I just want to touch on the intersectoral global action plan, IGAP. Just touch on that for us. What is it, and what is the relevance of it in this conversation?
It's so broad. You're just allowed to touch on it, all right? We are not allowed to spend the rest.
But it's so exciting. It's so exciting. So this concept of epilepsy being in the shadows, we're bringing it out of the shadows. And this is really where we're identifying that this is something that we can treat, that we can manage, that this disease should not hold anybody back. And the IGAP, there we go. Look at Eric. We go. So the IGAP is our opportunity to actually get a government, a ministerial, just an actual senior level input to actually start making that change. So the WHO in the World Health Assembly has now endorsed it. It's now been passed as a resolution. And this particular resolution has got a whole section dedicated to epilepsy and interwoven with epilepsy. And now, having had them accept that it is a major issue with all these recommendations of what should be made available, now we've got to actually use this to lobby and advocate and implement it. And I think that's the exciting thing, because we've all got these ideas and these projects and these areas that we want to target. Now we've actually got this behind us to say, look, it's actually been endorsed. You need to listen. We need to do this.
Okay.
I just want to ask you, we're speaking about so many topics here, and I know from my involvement with IBE Africa, which is the International Bureau of Epilepsy for Africa, and Epilepsy South Africa is a chapter, is that we have a lot of rural areas in and around, within South Africa, within Africa. What is your opinions, and just really briefly, about the family infrastructure there, the support there? Just like a quick comment or two, just from, if I can, Nondumiso and then Joe, just what advice can you give families and people in those areas?
Yeah, and I think it speaks to what Prof has already mentioned. It's what are the resources that are in the community, that are available in the community, and it will differ from community to community. So being based in an urban area, you might find that there's more access to those types of resources. But there's definitely, just in general and across all disease areas, there's a need for strengthening the health systems in rural communities, but utilizing the available resources there.
Sure. And Joe, I'd love to hear from you on this.
I totally agree with you. I mean, we end up having to have the children come down to see us, because often the screens that are needed, the access to the medications is not available at the rural setting. But saying that, I'm blown away often at the community support, which is often more engaged in the rural settings because people pull together. There's this wonderful phrase of it takes a village to raise a child. And that's, I think, still happens, which we don't see so much in urban settings and in the metropolis. There's swings and balances for what is actually optimal, but there's definitely a need for better resources at a rural level.
And it's very, very scary because I think the availability of medication becomes a challenge in a conversation. I heard recently that during training, there's so little time spent on teaching absolute fundamentals of epilepsy to individuals. And when a person has medical aid, which is only 2% in South Africa, we're dealing with access to private healthcare. And what you're talking about is that shift from children that are in your environment from rural or urban areas that have access to you, and then they disappear. And we need to remind those families that they can come back, correct for each of you, that they can come back and that there is a support system. But managing in the rural areas, I think, talks to the correct eating, growing your own vegetables, enabling work opportunities in that space as well. And for boys and girls and teenagers as young men, young boys and girls, whatever, right? I think we're all kind of nodding because we know how topical this is. And again, Joe is the head of Sub-Saharan Africa for ILAE, which is the International League Against Epilepsy, huge partner with IBE, and it's so wonderful to have you with Sanofi round the table. Just as I'm talking, I'm thinking, Eric, I'm coming back to you as a young person with epilepsy. During your teenage years, we know the peer pressure, we know the friendships that influence, we know the stigma that we're talking about in urban, peri-urban, rural areas of this whole stigma around being a person with epilepsy. And talk to me about your lifestyle. How did your hormones affect you? How did your social life get affected? How did your sports, the lifestyle around all the guys and girls around you? So yeah, just give you some time on that because it's it's the elephant in the room that nobody as a person with epilepsy actually wants to stand up and go, I have epilepsy. The strobe lights affect me. So over to you.
Okay. Yeah, well, like I said, grade 8 is quite an important year, especially because you are becoming now, you're developing your identity. And I think it was really quite difficult because of being not part of a group. I think I was the only person in my high school or even in the town at the moment that had epilepsy. So in grade 8. So there's not a lot of people and knowledge about this, especially in schools. So people are freaking out when I'm just getting a small seizure when I'm actually just fine. You just need to stay calm as well. But they think, oh, this is so weird, and especially in that time in your life, being part of a group is so important, and seeking this acceptance from certain groups,
approval,
to form part of a group was quite important. So that was, I think, out of all the things, that was the toughest for me because in my grade 10 year, actually, I had no friends at all. My only support system was my family. I would go to school and know there's nobody I can talk to during break times because I was so alone in this at school. So I think that was, for me, emotionally, was that quite tough. Luckily, I did not go to things such as alcohol abuse or using drugs or doing things like that. I think also because of, I think God also helped me through that period, and just to know that He still loves me, although I feel like, oh, nobody's accepting me, I'm getting rejected by this or that, or society is not accepting me or embracing what I still have to offer with my epilepsy. So I think that I hope, of him still loving me despite of all these things happening to me was also just so nice to remember and to know that there is hope for me, because he also promises in his word that he plans a future for you, to prosper you and not to harm you. So I also hold on to that, to know that there's still a plan for me. Although all of these bad things are happening to me, and society may say, "Oh no, you have epilepsy, you're epileptic," whatever they thought. Also,
just to add, Eric, I mean, I'm hearing so many different things from you, and the fact that you can say in grade 10 you had no friends and you couldn't engage, that meant the rollout of that you couldn't engage socially. You had no social circle, and you were relying on the hope and an amazing belief system that added to your resilience, your tenacity that we spoke about earlier in this regard. And, I think the exposure, and this would probably go to young ladies and young men across the board, where you have nobody in your environment to actually be talking to. And I mean, your teachers, surely in that space, your teachers were supporting you as a teenager? Was there someone you could talk to?
Well, at school, to be quite honest, there was not really someone that really supported me in that aspect.
Sure.
I do remember in grade 10, I was about in the hospital for about a month. So there was certain teachers that said, all right, they will have extra classes, especially for me during that time, the work that I missed. So a lot of people also interpreted that as, he's now the teacher's pet or whatever because he has extra class. So that was also quite tough. So there was teachers that said, we know that you've been away for a month in the hospital, so you are behind in the syllabus. So we will help you to get on the same level as the people are now. But generally speaking, I think more support may have been nice, like the same support my family gave me would have maybe been nice in school. But that was, like I said, I think that was, and things like sport. I used to love swimming. I actually did swimming for 7 years before grade 8, starting in grade 1. And they said to me, it's too great risk to take now. The risk of drowning or getting a seizure in the pool is too great. So we can't have you swimming anymore. And on the hockey field, having a seizure going down, and then people would freak out, what's happening now.
And school camps. Tell us about what happened when you went away on school camps. Could you do all the activities?
Yeah, no.
I mean, you're talking about
so
lifestyle and sport.
So
how did that affect you?
Yeah, a lot of the camps actually had a few activities involving heights, such as abseiling from a large tree or things like that. So the people were too afraid to let me try things like that, to know that it's too great risk for him. Maybe he falls or he get a seizure up there. What do we do then? Sure. Also that different treatment that I talked about, that was just, that was the thing that was very bad for me, was being treated different.
Well, I must just honor you today, because the courage as a 21-year-old to stand up and join us today and go, I'm actually going to tell you my story. I must just acknowledge you for that, because it takes a lot of courage, and all the things that you've learned can really help all those young people out there this month and this year and years to come. And you never realize how far your story and all the lives are touched. I mean, you just add to the stigmatism, Joe. Maybe we've got a little bit of time to just add to what Eric's saying in that regard, because you see it every day.
I know. I mean, it's so difficult. So one of the biggest myths across Africa is that epilepsy is infectious. And so not so much in Cape Town and Joburg, but in certainly some of the rural settings and some of the other parts of Africa, you'll have children precluded from even being in school at all because of the anxiety that they're infectious and therefore they shouldn't be around other children. So I think we've come a long way from that, but it's still an issue in some parts. But when you actually then get down to the nitty-gritty of the situations that Eric's describing are absolutely classic, where they say, yes, there's inclusion, come into the class, it's all fine. But then suddenly you're singled out and you feel different. And actually that shouldn't happen. There should be inclusion and adaptation. So if you're going on a field camp, there's probably going to be one kid in the camp who's also got diabetes. They're not going to stop that child from going. They should actually then be adapting the program. They'd probably sort out the food plans and make sure that there's no hypoglycemia and that the medicines are given. The same thing should be able to happen for somebody if they have epilepsy. We were talking about abseiling. Abseiling does scare me a bit. I'm so happy to hear that it was just a tree. And when we balance up life and living, we go, okay, so if you fall down that's a broken arm. Okay, that's maybe part of life. But actually, you don't want to have a high height where there's a risk of injury. The swimming, I would be really frustrated about you being stopped from the swimming. The reality is that if you have a seizure, you can drown in 2 inches of water. It's all about safety and life practice. So if you're swimming, you need to be in a setting where people are near you and where you're observed, but it shouldn't be that you're precluded from doing something that you love. There should be a way of accommodating and finding ways around it. So I just think that finding solutions to this is so important. It shouldn't hold you back. There should be ways that we can find a solution.
I mean, Jo and Eric, just to add to what you're saying, is that just the acceptance and the addressing the stigmatism and the education once again would have made your life as a young person so much more comfortable and emotionally secure, which those are issues that are now coming up for you as well. I mean, being a teenager is really, really difficult. And I have no doubt that you are chomping at the bit to ask Jo something else because she's just digging into so much, right, Nondumiso?
Well, I want to just build on what Eric has mentioned, being a 21-year-old person at university. And if we all remember our university days, you're exposed to a lot. It's a lot of temptations. But if one is living with epilepsy, you have to be mindful of some of these exposures. So I'm specifically talking about, relationships that people might have, exposure to drugs, to alcohol. This is all part of university life. What kind of suggestions would you give to young people in general and maybe for young women around issues of contraception, how to manage drugs, alcohol, and how it impacts on a young person with epilepsy?
I mean, I feel that any parent with a child, regardless of the epilepsy, they need to come with a warning signal of beware of adolescence, because I'm sorry, but you are a different species.
And then you change.
Exactly.
At 21, your parent goes, okay, well, welcome back.
Exactly. And actually how you unpack, what is the epilepsy that's then compounding on top of this incredibly complex period in your life? And actually, you've got to experience some of these things because it's part of growing up and part of living. But if you have epilepsy, unfortunately, you've got to be a little bit more sensible and insightful, because you do need to have regular sleep. You've got to eat. You need to do exercise, which in fact any adolescent should do, but we know the screen time usually takes over. But in fact, there's going to be a payback and your health is at risk if you don't look after yourself. The whole issue with contraception. So thank you for asking that. There is a reason I became a child neurologist, which was ideally to try and avoid that setting. But it is a reality. And those conversations, I in fact now start with the girls when they're in the kind of just pre-adolescent stage, because then you can have a bit of a giggle about it and it's a little bit less threatening. And I weave the conversation in as they get older. And my main statement that I give to the adolescent girls is, please don't get pregnant because you have your life ahead of you to live. So we do talk about contraceptives. We do talk about being sensible, and we talk about making a plan and being conscious. And sometimes it's just because they don't want to have periods, because that on top of everything else is like the last thing they need in their lives. If there is a situation as they get older and they're saying, no, I want to have a baby and I want to do this properly, then we talk about planning please don't have accidents. Please look after yourself, because there are so many issues, from taking vitamin supplements through to actually thinking about talking to somebody about whether you're on the right anti-seizure medications, so you don't then compound and make things worse. And unfortunately, adolescence is often not a time where planning comes in. That whole impulse behavior happens. So we try really hard to have open and transparent conversations and to say, there is no wrong, talk to me about it. I've had one wonderful adolescent who I couldn't understand why we'd had such good control of her seizures, and she was just going through a bad time in her life. And it was only when the family said, we've worked it out, we were changing the bedding and all the pills were in the pillowcase. And it was a cry for help. And this is what happens. And it's just having that opportunity to almost get it out of your system and work through it and be transparent and know that you've got the safety nets there and planning. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. I think you alluded to it earlier as well. And so is Joe, and so is Nondumiso. It really does come up. We talk about all these medications that we're giving. We talk about the lack of medications that people that are accessible to individuals. We talk about this through Africa, through South Africa, and I think we sometimes have so many robust conversations around the anti-epileptic medication, but what we don't talk about is the side effects, right? Mm. So Eric spoke about being moody and not wanting to sleep and being difficult to live with. I'd love to hear each of your opinions on that response, because it's just so important to be aware. We dealt with stigmatism. We're looking at lifestyle as teenagers. We're seeing the resilience, but let's talk about the side effects. Let's say, okay, teenagers become, it's like 2-year-olds to 3-year-olds become different people. You kind of look at your child at 13 and they go to sleep and they wake up and you go, oh, my word, who are you? But besides that, we've now got anti-epileptic drugs in that child, right? So yeah, just expand a bit, I think, on, maybe let's start with Eric. Eric, talk to me about the side effects of your medication and how you dealt with that as a teenager and young man now.
Yeah, I think especially in your academics, I think that is the part where it was at the greatest effect. Like I said, my medication used to make me feel a bit dizzy. So it was very difficult for me to focus, especially then, because then I had like high doses of this very strong medication. At least now it is a bit diluted. So, but then it was extremely high volumes that I had to take, and I couldn't write exams like after drinking that medication for at least 2 hours. I felt a bit dizzy or not present, and a bit foggy in my mind, and it felt like I wanted to sleep the whole time. So I think that was the greatest effect on me and in medication. So yeah, that was quite difficult for me to, especially with academics.
Thanks, Eric. I think you're opening up to a whole medical professional discussion here, and Nondumiso and Joe, I don't know which one of you'd like to field this. Is that the complexity of, and often you see a person with epilepsy on multiple drugs, yeah, because this deals with the small seizures, or what was known for many years as the petit mal seizures, we call them. They have so many names, absent seizures, and then the large seizures that you talked about with grand mal, or we have so many focal seizures. We have so many different names today, and some are taboo and some aren't. But I'd love to hear from the two of you on side effects, and what do you advise people how to manage these side effects?
Well, I'm no longer in that role.
Okay, so should we hand it to
Prof. Joe would be the best place to answer.
So I think the first thing is to try and make sure that you've got it right. So first of all, we've moved away from calling them anti-epileptic drugs, because in fact they don't cure the epilepsy. So we now call them anti-seizure medications, because what they're doing is they're dampening down the electrical activity, and that's the targeted effect that they're having. So by nature of that, it's not a case like taking a course of antibiotics. It's where you're taking it for it to serve a purpose. So you are taking those medicines to do a job. And if they're not doing their job, then you need to question what the point of them is. So 80% of people, about 80%, will come under control with the correct medicine at the right dose. And so then once you've got that right medicine, you then need to make sure you can try and do it at the lowest dose where it's working with the least side effects. The problem is when you're then hooking into the group where they're not easily controlled, you do add-on medicines. And the second you go over to, certainly into 3 medicines, you're guaranteed to get horrible side effects. And that's really, really tough. So some of the conversations that we have is, let's think about how often these seizures are happening. And if you're only having one a year, which does happen with some epilepsies, actually, should you be on a medicine all the time, especially if that one seizure you have is at nighttime and is 5 minutes? Because in fact, why would you be on a medicine every day that leaves you sleepy? But if you're having a seizure condition, which is happening every day, multiple times a day, and puts you at risk, then you've got no choice. You have the safety. So then you have this a balance of trying to get the right medicine at the right dose. And certainly with pediatrics, it's like a moving target because the brain is still growing and doing lots of changes. And we review these kids every 3 to 6 months and have those conversations. We look at their weight, we look at how they're doing, and we actually then adjust and change the medication and trying to get the right regime that works for the kids. And it's often not straightforward. And it's horrible. And it is horrible.
And I think just to underscore what Prof. Joe is saying, what is important is for the young person with epilepsy to communicate to the treating doctor or to the other health professionals that they come into contact with, because they can then modify or adjust or even refer to other people that can assist. So that relationship between the young person and the doctor becomes very, very important.
Absolutely. You know, we've through the IGAP and World Health Assembly and globally the advocacy, we know that epilepsy is a recognized disability, and that really is a really, again, another robust discussion, because a lot of people don't believe it's a disability, but it really is a neurological disorder that you can see. We've got an IGAP that is now absolutely accepted. So I suppose one of the many concerns, and Joe, you touched on earlier, is you go through all these tests. What sort of tests do you use, and just also in summary, to diagnose whether it's epilepsy or not? And what maybe are the causes of epilepsy? A lot of people also are unaware of what those are.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'll hand over to you.
It starts with the story, and it starts with listening. So, I mean, there is no blood test. There is no magic answer for diagnosing an epilepsy. So it starts with a clinical history. And then the gold standard for actually making the diagnosis is if you're doing an EEG and you have the video on at the same time and you capture an event. I mean, that's the golden egg where we can say to the family, we've got it. Here's the proof. We know where it's coming from. We know what's going on, and we've got the pictures. And in fact, a lot of my families are great because they take their cell phones and they take videos, and they come in and they go, I don't know, what do you think he or she's doing now? Have a look at the phone and I'm not sure. And then sometimes we know that it's the typical events that we're treating, and sometimes there are other things that come in and we can go, okay, you don't need to worry about them. So those home videos can be incredibly useful. So if you've got a consultation coming up because you're not sure what's actually happening with your child, take a picture of it, take it in, show the doctor, because it's worth 1,000 words. Because we're so biased in how we interpret what is being said to us that often we miss completely what's actually going on. Having done those stages, there are other tools that we use that sometimes help us. So the examination might show us that, say, somebody's weak down one side. So then we'll definitely want to have a brain imaging. And if there's any suggestion that when the seizures happen, that they seem to be coming out in what we call a focal area. So say there's just twitching of the hand, or there's an area of confusion that doesn't then go into a more generalized movement, then we would definitely want to have a brain scan.
Okay.
We sometimes do the metabolic testing. I certainly do that in all little children because it's got huge implications for how we treat them. And then genetics is a loaded area. So when we looked at causes of epilepsy in the African setting, the major causes in our setting are, in fact, unfortunately, insults that have happened around the time of birth, and then neurological infections that have affected the brain. Those dominate as kind of big wedges. But then there's a whole section that's almost a half or more of the pie diagram, if you think of it like that, where we have no idea and we think are probably genetic causes, which are not necessarily coming through a family, but are new events. And it's an area we lag grossly behind. And
sure. I'm gonna ask you that post this, we can answer that even fully. I know, as Eric, as an example, as a young man had nodes implanted on his brain to really get to where his epilepsy was. And I think he was sharing with us earlier, it felt like it had been sucked out of his brain when he had that done. So I want to thank each of you. Nondumiso, I want to just so thank you for joining us and having Sanofi present and really putting this at the forefront of your agenda. I know I want to say to Joe, again, Professor Wilmshurst, to hear your words of wisdom today and really hear your medical advice, your sound advice. You're so practical about it as well. So from the youngsters and right through and the medical advice has just been so valuable. And once again, for you speaking out, Eric, I got goose flesh during a few things that you said when I've heard your story prior to this. I kind of just, the tears have welled up and today I was quite contained. I think I did. So on behalf of Epilepsy South Africa, I just want to thank you and every single one of our viewers for joining us. I'd encourage you to share this webinar as far and as wide as you can. And if you'd like to have consistent information from us, join us as a member at membership.epilepsy.org.za. We can share so many reports and newsletters and all sorts of things. And once again, on behalf of all of us, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of today, and take care. And in normal settings, I'd say drive safe, but just be safe and take care of yourself and your families and support everybody that you know with epilepsy. Thank you so much.